Okay, let's just dive right in. Whether you're the one doing the hiring or you're the one trying to get hired, we are all part of this really high-stakes game. It's called personnel selection. And how companies choose who gets the job, well, it's a science. And it's full of some surprising truths and some really tough choices. Understanding that science is absolutely crucial. Because let's face it, it affects almost every part of our working lives.
So why are the stakes so incredibly high? Well, it goes all the way back to a principle discovered nearly a century ago. This quote you're looking at, it points to a difference that's kind of mind-blowing. Research shows again and again that in pretty much any job, the top performer isn't just a little better. They are often twice as productive as the worst performer. And that's for simple jobs. For complex roles, professional jobs, that gap can be even wider. Getting this one decision right is literally worth millions.
And that really brings us to the million-dollar question for this whole explainer. With so much on the line, what tools do companies actually use to find that top-tier talent? And, more importantly, do those tools even work? We're about to dig into the science, the myths, and the really difficult trade-offs behind the entire hiring process.
So let's start with the one tool we have all experienced, the job interview. It just feels like the most natural, common-sense way to pick somebody. But is it really? I mean, think about it. You sit down, you have a chat, you build a nice rapport. You walk away feeling like, yeah, I've got a true sense of that person. Their personality, their competence, their fit. We trust that gut feeling to tell us who the right choice is. And hey, it's the most practical, cheapest, and easiest method out there.
Now, there's actually a technical name for this kind of get-to-know-you chat. It's called an unstructured interview. The questions are pretty much made up on the spot, they're totally different for every single person, and the final evaluation is just based on an overall impression or, like we said, that gut feeling.
And here is the first really big surprise. Decades of research show that this classic unstructured interview is one of the weakest predictors of how well someone will actually perform on the job. In fact, studies show it often just ends up being a really clumsy, roundabout way of measuring someone's general intelligence without even trying to. It's just not a reliable tool.
So the takeaway here is that not all interviews are created equal, and this shows the alternative perfectly. Over on the right, you have the structured interview. Every single candidate gets the exact same job-relevant questions, and their answers are scored against a preset system. It might feel a little less personal, sure, but that consistency is exactly what makes it a far more powerful predictor of success. The science is just crystal clear on this. Structure beats gut feeling. Every single time.
Okay, moving on to our second myth. Let's tackle one of the most controversial tools in the entire hiring toolkit, the General Mental Ability Test, or what most of us just think of as an IQ test.
There's this really popular belief that these tests are abstract, they're unfair, and they have very little to do with the practical skills you actually need to succeed in the real world. A lot of critics argue they just don't belong in the modern workplace at all.
But the science tells a very different story. After researchers combined hundreds of studies, they landed on this number, a correlation of 0.50 between scores on these tests and actual job performance. Now, to put that in perspective, in the world of psychology, a correlation like that isn't just good, it is massive. It makes it one of the single best predictors of job success we have ever found.
But, and this is a huge but, you simply cannot talk about these tests without talking about their massive downside. While they are incredibly predictive, they also tend to produce significantly different average scores between different ethnic groups, and this creates a huge legal and ethical problem known as adverse impact.
And this shows exactly how that gets measured. In the US, there's a guideline called the 4/5 rule. Just look at this example. Let's say a company hires 20% of applicants from the majority group. Well, the rule says the hiring rate for any minority group should be at least 4/5 of that, which is 16%. But in this case, the minority hire rate is only 10%, and because 10% is less than 16%, this hiring process has created adverse impact. That could open the company up to serious legal challenges, even if the discrimination was completely unintentional.
So this brings us to our third and final myth, which is about a tool that's become super popular, partly because it helps avoid the problems we just talked about. But are personality questionnaires just, unscientific fluff? Corporate horoscopes?
Well, while there are tons of silly quizzes out there, pretty much all of the scientific research on personality uses this well-validated framework known as the Big Five. The idea is that most of the important differences in our personalities can be captured by these 5 big dimensions. This is not astrology. This is a really robust, data-driven model of human personality.
So, the big question, does it predict job performance? Yes, but one trait stands out way above the rest, and that's conscientiousness. This is basically your tendency to be organized, dependable, responsible, and hardworking. Across hundreds of studies in all kinds of different jobs, people who score higher on conscientiousness just tend to perform better at work.
So now we can see the fundamental trade-off, right? This chart lays it all out. Mental ability tests are highly predictive, but they come with a high risk of that adverse impact we talked about. Personality tests, on the other hand, are only modestly predictive. Conscientiousness has a correlation of about 0.20, but, and this is key, they have the huge advantage of creating very little, if any, adverse impact.
Okay, so let's try to bring all of this together now. We've seen that every popular hiring method has its own serious strengths and, well, some pretty serious weaknesses. And this leads us right to the central dilemma of personnel selection.
So really, what it all comes down to is this. Every single hiring tool has to be judged against these three often competing goals. You want something that actually predicts who will be good at the job, you need something that is fair and legal, and you need something that's practical enough to actually use in the real world. The problem is, you can almost never have all three at once. And that right there is the entire hiring problem in a nutshell. The most predictive tool, that mental ability test, has the highest fairness risk. One of the fairest tools, the personality test, is much less predictive. And the most practical tool of them all, that unstructured interview, is the least predictive of all. There's just no magic bullet here.
And that leaves us with a final, really difficult question. Companies have to choose what they're going to prioritize. Do they go for maximum predictive power, even if it comes with a risk to fairness? Do they prioritize fairness above all else, even if it means using a less accurate tool? Or do they just opt for what's cheapest and easiest, knowing full well it's the least effective? There are no easy answers here, only a series of complex trade-offs that shape the workforce we all see every single day.